Hello, welcome again. You're still watching, and in this video we're going to be going from Gunning to Gundaroo. Now I should say before we go any further that I've made this video a little bit longer so that you would actually get to the village of Gundaroo, or at least to the sign that says Gundaroo, because I felt stopping in the middle somewhere between Gunning and Gundaroo would be unsatisfying for everyone. So I added on a few extra minutes from the next clip, made this one 20 minutes long, and we'll get to the sign that tells you that you are at the village of Gundaroo. Now, as we came into town, we came over the Jack Shaw Bridge. I assume Jack Shaw was a local identity, and that goes over a place called Meadow Creek. We're coming down into, we're going out of Gundaroo at the moment, but in Gundaroo there is a motel, a service station, a pub, a couple of cafes, a school, post office. It's a small village. One sign says about 1,000 people. Another one says 500 people. I'll split the difference and say it's somewhere in between about 750 people. The school is a primary school, so I think that the children who live in the area and go to high school, they either go to Goulburn, which is about 40 kilometres, or maybe to Yass, which is a little bit further along, or perhaps some of the private schools in Canberra, which is about 60 kilometres away. And we're just taking a left turn onto the Gundaroo Road, and on the left-hand side you'll see there's a new subdivision going in. Gunning has become a place where people are moving to from Goulburn and or Canberra, mainly because land values and house prices in both those places are a little bit more expensive. So out here in Gundaroo you get more land, you get that country village feel, and you're not all that far from civilization. So the population is growing, and I'm not going to say it's one of those tree changer places, but it's certainly a place where there are some people moving to, as you can see by the housing development. And we're about 29 kilometres from Gundaroo, and we'll be travelling along this road, and I'll be talking about things that come into my mind and so on as we're progressing. Now, the last video I talked about the 2 wheels versus 3 wheels discussion or debate, and I'm sure there are people who came down on both sides of that debate. The purists will always say, well, 2 wheels is the only way to go, and those who say, well, I'd love to keep riding, but I'm 60-odd years old and it's hard to lift up a 400-kilo bike, will say 3 wheels is safer and I still like to ride, and so on. This time I'd like to have a bit of a discussion and throw out ask people their thoughts about the scooter versus motorcycle debate. Now, before, again, the purists on either side of that debate get themselves all worked up, I should say I have owned both and ridden both, and I own both at the moment. I mentioned in an earlier video that I owned a Piaggio MP3 400 for a while, and I currently have a Suzuki Bergman 650, which is a scooter. Now, if you think about it, in the period after World War II, was a really boom period, I think, for British bikes like BSA and Triumph and others that motorcycle historians will know, and American bikes like Harley and Indian, and again, as the motorcycle historians will know, other brands. Although I guess the market was beginning to settle itself out as the car market had, and some brands were being winnowed out of the market. In Italy, they began making scooters after World War II. First, the company that made them was called Vespa, and over the years they made Vespa, Piaggio, Gilera, and a few other brands. I think Laverda might be one of their brands as well. And at some point, just after World War II and into the 50s, I think the Japanese decided to get interested in this scooter making business. Now, if you think about it for a moment, the small scooters, so the 50s, the 90s, the ones the posters get around, I think there are a CT110, or there might be a CT90 as well, and even up to 150. They are they're ideal for the purpose they're designed for. They're designed to be machines that are cheap to make, cheap to run, cheap to own, and get on them and you can zip around the city and you can commute to your work and so on without a lot of cost. And at some point, the Japanese, but particularly Honda, I think, led the way with step-through scooter and so on. And I'm not sure how many millions of them they've sold over the years. Where the drawback for the scooter comes in is that once you, in Australia at least, and in New South Wales, once you get over about 200 cc's or displacement, the cost of putting those bikes on the road is, well, it's quite expensive. The purchase price is much higher, of course, but registration charges, the CTP insurance, the comprehensive insurance, all those things, and all the costs are a little bit, let's say, prohibitive. So they don't have quite the appeal as the daily commuter when you get up around the 200 and bigger size. Now, at some point, again, the Japanese decided to make what are now referred to as maxi scooters. And I think Yamaha have a T-Max, which I think used to be a 500 and now might be a 560. Suzuki have the 200, 400, 650 Bergman. Honda have, I think, a 700. Kawasaki do a 300. And BMW do a 400, a 600, and a 650. And I think the Italian maker Aprilia even does an 850 scooter. And when you're getting up to 400, 600 and larger, you're getting up to the sort of bike that's not only handy for doing the daily commute and zipping in and out of the traffic and getting you to and from work and those sort of things, but it's the kind of bike you can take out on a trip like this on the weekend, and it'll hold its own with the sports bikes, with the cruisers, with the touring bikes and so on. And they have a pretty good level of comfort and a pretty good level of wind protection. And so they are the ideal sort of, if you like, cross-purpose bike of saying, well, I'll get one of these to get to and from work during the week, and on the weekend when I feel like going and blowing out the cobwebs and just enjoying a ride, I can get on my Suzuki 650 or my Honda 700 or Aprilia 850 or whatever it is, and I can enjoy the countryside, and I know that I won't be left behind by the rest of the gang if we're riding in a group. I know I won't be struggling at any point to get from one place to the other. And I'll have a comfortable and enjoyable ride. On this moto vlog playlist of mine, I've got a review of my Suzuki 650, and I find it is, well, to my mind, it's the benchmark of maxi scooters in that it has plenty of storage, both in the dash and under the seat. I added a top box to mine to give it a little bit more storage. They are belt driven. Like all scooters, they have the constant variable transmission, or the CVT, and that just means twist and go. And that makes an awful lot of sense when you're in the stop-start traffic of the city. If you imagine trying to get to work on your bike and you're feathering the clutch and changing down through the gears at every traffic light or roundabout or toll point or whatever it is that you have to go through on your ride, the twist and go of the scooter makes a lot more sense. Close the throttle off as you're coming up to an intersection, and the transmission will automatically change down into the appropriate gear. I know clutch to work, front and back brake levers both on the handlebars. The Bergman can come with heated grips and a heated seat as well. I don't think it was sold that way in Australia, but I know in other markets it was sold that way. It has an electrically adjustable screen, so that while you're on the run, if you're out on the open road like this and you want a little less wind in your face and you want to be protected from the wind, you just raise the screen as high as it can go. When you come into town, you're down to 50 or slower and you want a bit of airflow, especially in summertime, you just drop the screen down. It also has electrically folding in mirrors, so that if you're parking or even doing lane splitting, if that's legal where you live, then you just press the button, the mirrors fold in, and then when you get to the head of the queue, you press the button and fold them back out again. To me, they make perfect sense for, like I said, the daily commute and the open road ride on the weekend. You wouldn't buy one like a Bergman 650 or a BMW 650 to deliver pizzas. And if you had one of those little pizza delivery ones or the postie bikes, you probably wouldn't take it out on a ride like this and expect to be getting up to 100 or 110 kilometres an hour on the highways and cruising along the open road as you would be in the Kawasaki. But nevertheless, I think they make a lot of sense. I'm not coming down in favour of one or the other. As I said, I own both, and I enjoy riding both of them. But I'm just interested to see what other people think about one or the other. Now, along this road we've gone past, and I haven't commented on the fact that there are various government signs telling you about the federal government black spot program, which was putting some money into parts of this road, and you can see where they've done that. The road is wider. There's a made shoulder. There are markings down the centre of the road, and there are markings on the edge of the road. Just then we've gone past the sign that says we're now entering the Yass Valley Council area. Previously we were in the Upper Lachlan Council area. So the three councils that we've passed through in this area, the Goulburn Mulwaree, the Upper Lachlan, and now we're in the Yass Valley Council. A little further along, there was a state government sign saying they were also had provided some funding. I couldn't read the details as I was working through the video, but I knew it was a state government sign. They've also provided some money. You can see where that's happened with the roads, again, a bit wider, and there's some guardrails and things like that. So for the most part, this road is in pretty good condition. It's a good road to ride, and you can see by the footage that it's not too bumpy or uneven at the moment. And you get some pretty good views as you're coming up the rises and across some of these hills. I didn't see a lot of traffic, and you haven't seen a lot of traffic on this road so far. Gundaroo, I'll talk about more when we get to it. It's just a small village. Gunning is a small village. In between is the turn off to Yass. So if you lived on one of these farms in this area, you might go this way if you wanted to go to Yass, which then takes you down the Hume Highway to Gundagai and then eventually onto Albury and into Victoria. If you wanted to go to Goulburn, you could either continue on this road and go across to the Federal Highway eventually, or you could go to Gunning, and then as we were coming into Gunning, there was a turn off that said Goulburn, and you would go on the Hume Highway, but you would obviously go north. Like I said, not a lot of traffic on the road. It's not one of those roads that people would go on for. It's more of a tourist road, I guess, than a transit road of any sort. I kind of have mixed feelings about those government signs that you see on the side of the road telling you when they're they're doing something on the road. In one way, it's good to know that's where all your petrol dollars and tax registration charges and so on go. In another way, it's kind of just advertising government doing the job they're supposed to do, build roads. I don't want to get into politics and polarise people about those sort of things, but you think, well, what are governments for? Well, they're to build roads. One of the things they're to do is to build roads. So we shouldn't need signs to tell us that they're building a road here or that they're funding some improvement to the road. It's coming up on this grey Suzuki Swift. This lady wasn't, there was a lady in this car, or a woman, should I say. She wasn't going particularly slow, but she was just going a bit slow even for me, so I decided I'd just get past her. She seemed to be a bit, not taken aback, but a bit surprised to see a motorcycle come up the side of her. That's one of those times, I guess, when I was talking about earlier about people in cars being aware of what's behind them. One of those things that I think you've got to do, whether you're in your car or on your bike, is constantly be looking in your mirrors and see what's behind you, or what's coming up the side of you. Somebody's pulling out to overtake, as I was there, and she wasn't aware of me. She could make a right-hand turn, for example. It could have been a disaster. Fortunately, it wasn't. But it's one of those times when I think that you're out on a country road and you have got to be constantly scanning your rear vision mirror and wing mirrors to see, well, what's behind me. There may be nothing behind you, but then all of a sudden there's a bike behind you. All of a sudden there's a truck behind you, and somebody wants to get past you, and because you're going too slowly for them or something. Talking about the Japanese and building scooters and so on earlier, there's a story. I'm not sure if it's true or not, but it'd be lovely if it was true that when the Japanese car industry was getting back on its feet after World War II, when the very first Mini came out, the Japanese were curious to know how this thing was built. So it's alleged that one of the Japanese car companies bought a Mini, took it back to Japan, pulled it apart, every nut, bolt, screw, rivet, um, whatever you want to call it. So they laid this car out, every single piece on the right-hand side and left-hand side of the car, looked at it and figured out how it was made. So there was a right hand and a left, there was in the Mini, if you'll recall, it's the first car with an east-west engine. In other words, the engine went across the body rather than along the body. Because of that, they were able to create a front-wheel drive vehicle rather than traditional rear wheel, and that made more room in the passenger compartment and also made for a flat floor, should I say. So the Japanese wanted to know how these cars were made. So they bought one and pulled it apart to completely, laid it out on the floor in a workshop, and then said to themselves, we're going to build this, only we're going to build it better and we're going to build it cheaper. And some of their very first attempts were very poor. And we all know that in the very first Japanese cars that we saw in Australia, we all looked down our noses and said, oh, it's made in Japan and it'd be rubbish. And now the biggest selling brand in Australia is Toyota, which is a Japanese brand, of course. One of the next biggest selling is Mazda, and after that you've got the Korean brands. So they learned their lesson. They learned how to build cars, and I think they did the same with motorcycles. They learned by looking at the British bikes and saying, well, this is how the British build them. We're going to build something the same, only better, and we're going to build it cheaper. And again, I don't want to get into the argument between the Japanese bikes and the American bikes because people like what they like and they ride what they like and so on. But in my experience, the Japanese bikes are well made, they're reliable, they're considerably cheaper than American bikes. I know that, as I said in one of the videos earlier, when I talked about buying the Kawasaki that I'm riding in this video, it was probably $20,000 cheaper than the similarly designed Harley. And I just couldn't justify spending that amount of money, even if I wanted to. And my Kawasaki has been extremely reliable, and I'm very happy with it. I'm sure people who own Harleys are also very happy with theirs. But the British bikes, I believe, went the way that they did because they weren't able to adapt to the sort of things that the Japanese were doing. And one of the things that we'll always be talking about is the cost of labour. And of course, we know about all the things that happened in the British car industry during the 70s and 80s. But the Japanese just seemed to set their mind to saying, we're going to build these bikes and we're going to build them better and cheaper than the British do. And they did. And BSA and Triumph and companies like that went the way of the dinosaurs and the dodos. I know that Triumph are back now, but I think it's a bit like Mini being back. They're back, but they're not owned by Triumph. They're not made by the British company any longer. Hope you get a sense of the openness and the vastness of the country here. The road is quite wide, but the scenery from here is also quite vast. I just saw a couple of blokes go past me on bikes going in the opposite direction. I think they both waved. I know I did, and I'm pretty sure they did as well. So we're talking about in one of my earlier videos, what's the protocol? Do you wave at other motorcyclists? I do. Just going across Gundaroo Creek here now. And for some reason, I don't recall the road being quite as bumpy as it seems to be in this footage now. The footage seems to be flickering and jumping about a bit, and I can only put that down to the state of the road. Although if you look at the video now, the camera seems to have adjusted, changed its angle slightly. Maybe that's contributing to the jumpiness of the footage. As I say, I don't recall the road being all that uncomfortable, but as you can see there, the section we're going across here now, there's some patches on patches that tend to make it all a bit uneven. It's coming up to Christmas Tree Farm on the left-hand side. You'll see the sign just about now. That literally is a Christmas tree farm. So the people there have paddock planted with rows and rows and rows of pine trees, which they hope will reach either maturity or cutting down size by about Christmas. And they have signs up just around Christmas time. You can either go out there and cut your own tree, or they'll cut one for you. Roadwork signs coming up indicate that we're just coming into the outskirts of Gundaroo, and in a moment we'll be coming up to what appears to be a new subdivision in Gundaroo. Road being built on the left-hand side just up here, and it looks like there are going to be new houses or something built there as well. Now, I said before I'd talk about Gundaroo in the next video, but it's a village that's not all that far from Canberra, so there are people who live out here and work in Canberra. And we're just about at the end of the video, so I'll say thank you again for everyone for watching. See you in the next video when we will be going from Gundaroo